You're listening to Rivercast, brought to you by River of Life Church in Guilderland, New York. Now here's Pastor Sean.
Well, in Genesis 1:1, when God made all the world, He made all the sky and the fish and the animals and the birds, and yes, bugs and the rats and the mice and the snakes, ladies, and men too, right? I get started. My boys make fun of me. I see a snake, I tend to jump to them. Not that afraid of them, but you just think get you know what I mean? But He made all of that stuff. He made Adam. And Adam, He brought all, God said, the Bible tells us that God brought all the animals in front of Adam and He named them. And we don't know what language He was speaking and what all of that was about. And I doubt it was English, but He named the zebra. He said to the giraffe, that looks like a giraffe. And He looked at the praying mantis and said, that looks like a praying mantis. And you're like, that's exhausting. Like, yeah, YouTube wasn't invented yet. He had no TV. There's nobody talking to. What else is He going to do? Sit around all day? So He hung out with the animals. But somewhere along the line, He probably scratched His head and said, I'm kind of lonely. Like there's a boy and a girl elephant, there's a woman and a man rhinoceros, and there's only one of me. And God, I'm thankful for you, but God said it's not good for man to be alone. And so the Bible says He did, right? And we men need ladies. And so God put a sleep over Adam, and He took a rib from him, and He made Eve. And the Bible says that God presented Eve to Adam, and we take that today really as the first marriage, the first wedding ceremony, beautiful and pure and perfect and all of that. And can you imagine a relationship where there was no ego, no selfishness, no pride, no drama, no past anything, no baggage, no miscommunication, no anything? Do you know what marital bliss that would be? How amazing. Like that would be incredible. That would be amazing. And those knuckleheads, and we would have done the same thing, sinned against the holy God of heaven and did the one thing that He said not to do, and it blew apart all of that wonderful perfection together and relationship that God had made. And here we are thousands of years later, still struggling in that whole area of marriage and relationships and out of it, because the only way that I can envision it, like spiritually, it set off a nuclear chain reaction of just an explosion spiritually in the souls and the lives of people, and it affected our relationship with God and with one another, and it's the source of pain and heartache and so much in the world today that it's so much brokenness and hurt. And so Jesus is talking as we've been walking with Jesus through the book of Matthew, and Pharisees come up to Him and they say, and they have another test for Him. They're trying to hit Him at every little angle, right? And I'm so glad that Jesus He doesn't get caught. It's like, oh, I don't know. I got to think about that one. I get asked hard questions. I'm like, I'll get back to you on that. Let me do a little research, a little bit of reading. Let me think through that. That's one I hadn't faced or thought about before, but not Jesus. And so the Pharisees came and said, hey, is it okay for a man to divorce his wife for just no cause, any reason whatsoever, or not? And they're trying to trip Him up, and they're focusing on all of the rules and the laws. And I'm so glad that Jesus didn't just give them the short answer. I'm glad He didn't He has a habit of answering questions with questions. He actually took time and unpacked this, and I'm so glad. This passage has so many things that we could talk about. We literally could spend 4 or 5 weeks in it, just different areas that touch such significant part of our lives. We won't do that today, but we're going to talk about marriage, and as Jesus talks about divorce, and He also goes a bit at length about singleness, something that we don't often talk a lot about, but we need to. So read with me, if you would, the question that He got asked, and let's look at the answer that He shares in Matthew chapter 19, verse 3. The Bible says this, and the Pharisees came up to Him and tested Him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? We want to know, Jesus, this is a policy, this is a law, who's right? What was going on is there was a debate. You've Probably if you've been in churches for a while, you've heard about the Pharisees and Sadducees. If you're new to church, you're like, what in the world is that? Is that like the latest drug that gets advertised on TV? I don't know who makes up these drug names. They are just the most crazy things in the world. I guess that's why you kind of like, oh, that sounds bad for you. Probably stay away from that. I don't know. But Pharisees and Sadducees are kind of two different groups. Another group that you probably aren't familiar with, if you've watched the video series Chosen, you would have picked up this along the way. Along the Pharisees, there were two different groups, right? They're religious people and they have like different groups, like which camp are you in? It's like always the Yankees or the Red Sox, or like who are you for or against? And these other groups were called Hillel and Shammai. And one of them said, you can only get divorced if your spouse commits adultery. And the other one's like, yeah, that's not right. Any good reason, according to Deuteronomy, you can do it. So they had this big whole debate, and they're asking Jesus to step into that whole crazy, ridiculous world. Let's be honest, they didn't care about the people. They were just all about the law and the policy, right? And Jesus blows by all of that. But look what he says. This is the part we want to start focusing in on. And he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Let me pause for a second. Whenever you get asked a hard question, go back to the basics. Go back to the beginning. Let the simple beginning. And Jesus says, I'm not getting into this debate and mess that you're talking about. Let me go back to what God designed marriage, and let's think about the simple truths of what that says. Have you not read, he who made them, created them, made them male and female? And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast, superglued, cling to, cleave to, be welded together, hold to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They are one flesh when they come together in physical union, but let's be honest, there is a growing and becoming more and more through marriage of what that oneness, that one is like. And so what therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. That's the new part that he had. The other stuff was in the Old Testament. Jesus is like, come on guys, if God says glue to your wife and be together and be one, let's be honest, if God put them together, you should not be undoing what God did. Don't do that. So they said to him, aha, we got you now. Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? Well, if what you're saying is true, Moses said, hey, if you're going to divorce your wife, give her a certificate and send her on her way. Kind of like just a whatever reason. Look what Jesus said. Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed, didn't command, but allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. In other words, if you're hell-bent on divorcing somebody, do it the right way. Moses was speaking into a world where men were sending their wives off, but not making a clean break and setting them free and setting them loose. And there was, inappropriate, just leaving a mess in the middle of that and drama and all of it. And Moses is like, hey, if you're hell-bent and going to divorce somebody, do a certificate and do it right. But he says in verse 9, he says, and I say to you, he said, but from the beginning, that's not God's plan. That's not what God wants and intends for this thing. That's not the design. We'll talk about that in a moment. And he goes on, he says, and I say to you, whoever divorces your wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. So we're going to talk about marriage, we're going to talk about divorce, we're going to talk about singleness, and there's lots of grace this morning. So let me say, we are not... My focus and interest, I don't know why this marker is here, but it's bugging me. My focus this morning is not on policy and legals and parameters. Usually in churches, we kind of get to we almost get into the IRS 1040 of the different things of life and all of the rules and regulations except in this cause and that. And let me be clear, I'm not trying to make light of realities and sins and all of that, not whatsoever, because these are real. But I want us to unpack, what's God's design? Let's talk a little bit about how things fall apart, and let's talk about implications for life, because we live in a world today where marriage is not just redefined. The issue of the day isn't just, can a man and woman get divorced? The issue of the day is, who is a man? What is a woman? And there's marriages I've seen where two different transgender people, a biologically born woman and a biologically born man, think that they're the wrong gender, so they swap and then they get married. And that just, to me, that kind of, is confusing, and it's just, wow. So there's a lot going on in this world. So we're going to talk about kind of the definition of marriage simply. I'm not going to camp out there, but we're going to talk about the design of marriage. What did God mean marriage for? We're going to talk about the difficulty of it. And then we're going to talk about the beauty and what singleness really is all about. We don't often hear about that. So let's talk about the definition. Jesus gives us the definition of marriage. He didn't have to unpack this at length like he did. But he's like, I'm glad you asked, and I'm so glad for us today that this is so clear that he just said, hey, from the beginning, God made them male and female. In fact, he calls them man and, his wife. I want you to notice in this definition of marriage, there's in the middle of that a definition of who we are as identity as people, that God made us men and women. He made us male and female. And I understand the social construct that we have going on today, that some people feel like they don't fit whatever in their concept, the perspective of that particular gender, what it means to be a woman in the world around them or a man. I get that there's a little bit of uncomfortability. I mean, to be honest with you, we all don't fit certain social constructs, We all fit like, well, that's kind of not my tribe. If I'm at some sort of concert or some sort of group and there's all kinds of motorcycle guys, everybody's riding Harleys and all of that, that's fantastic. But I may be like, these aren't my people. I don't know anything about them. I could barely know what an exhaust is from I don't know anything. It's not my crowd. I would be looking to hang with people like me. But there is a huge difference from somebody saying, but you know what? I need to go through, not just kind of be a different kind of focus in the world a little differently, but I just need to be a different, complete gender altogether. And then I want to change my body to be, make my biology, make the plumbing match to what I think sociologically. Can I tell you that kind of stuff went on in Nazi Germany? When people are experimenting with the sociology of the day and the psychology, it ultimately ends up in the biology and the experimentation of the body. The Germans thought that there was, a hierarchy of genetic ability, and they were experimenting with all of that. And no surprise that in the prison camps, they were biologically experimenting, doing operations on people's bodies and mutilating and all kinds of things. And folks, it just kind of needs to be said along the way. It's unconscionable to remove organs and body parts that are perfectly healthy and designed because of a mental sociological thinking. And I'm moving past all of the rhetoric and all of the right and wrong and all of the hateful to just say that is kind of really, that is experimentation at a medical level that is on par with Nazi Germany, and it's absolutely horrible. God's definition of marriage involves maleness and manness and womanness and femaleness together, that God made people in his design of us. He made us male and female, men and women. And in a sinless world, there would be no, genetical confusion in the middle of that. That everybody would be, born and biologically. In other words, some people are born and they have multiple sex organs inside of them, is what I'm trying to say. But that is not the original plan and the design of God. And God's plan is that he made us male and female, man and woman, and he did it with a purpose so that we could come together in marriage. That's his definition. That is what God's definition of marriage is. That there is meant to be built into the middle of that an understanding of a sexuality. There's built into the middle of that a definition of a recognition of God putting two people together that are something together more than they are the two parts separately. That's what marriage is. Let's talk about the design of marriage. So Jesus kind of goes on from verse 5 and he says, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. In other words, what God has done, we are to not try to undo. So the design of marriage, we understand what biblically, the way God looks at the world, and he made us that way, and we can experiment and change with it, but it just doesn't work well. The design is a permanent relationship with a purpose. He said, the two now are become one. God's design, he said it wasn't good for Adam to be alone. He needed a helper in his life. God made us relational creatures. He made us to need each other. You might look at your weaknesses and say, oh, why am I not as good at the other person as this? Why can't I do what they do? And these kinds of things. Can I tell you, God doesn't just give us our strengths. He gives us our weaknesses, because if you didn't have any weaknesses, you wouldn't need anybody. You'd be doing everything all on your own. That goes for us as pastors. We have strengths and weaknesses. It goes through everybody in the church. And so he made us relationally together, and we are something together. And I'm thinking now in the marriage relationship, far more than just the two parts separately. It's more than it's kind of a 1 + 1 = 3. Like there's something powerful, incredible together that's different than just the two together. It's not out of a convenience. It is something that God said, there is a oneness, there is a support, there is a help, there is a recognition, there is an affirmation, there is something about being known and being loved and being accepted for who you are, being seen for who you are, not having to prove yourself, which is what marriage should be, just two people who together love and committed and care for one another. He says that's the purpose of this. No surprise that it's to be something that is so wonderful and such a blessing and such a support, and no division, no separation in the middle of that later on in the Bible, the marriage is a picture of what Jesus is like to the church, that he sacrificed in love for us, and he puts us together in perfect relationship and perfect harmony together. So wherever your marriage relationship is, that's the goal, is to what we desire of Jesus, that we sing about and we experience his grace and his care and his love and his presence in our life and his forgiveness and acceptance. All that's the same stuff that we should be striving for and working toward in our marriage. That was the original design that God had made for us as people. Singles, hold on, don't get nervous. I'm going to get to you in just a moment, all right? There's some cool stuff in here for you as well, but we got to unpack piece by piece by piece. And so that's the purpose of marriage. And because of that purpose, he built a permanence into it. He says, what God has put two people together, don't separate that. Don't try to rip it and tear it apart. Don't do that. When two have come together like that, that's why divorces are so messy and so painful. That's why they're so damaging, not just with that couple and questions get asked, but it's a ripple effect. The kids in those relationships then begin asking deep questions. The younger they are, the deeper and harder it is. But even adult kids whose parents go through that struggle and work through that. And, you know, if you ask a lot of children been through it, somehow they feel like, well, I did something wrong. If I'd have been a better kid, you know, my parents would be together. Because deep down, they just know that it's not right. Mom and dad should be together. And it is so difficult because God put together, and there is a oneness, and you don't rip something apart that's that glued together without it being painful and being in a mess. And so Jesus said, this gluing together is so significant that the only thing that really gives you a reason for divorce in this passage is if your spouse has already committed adultery. See, that's the whole sexuality and marriage together piece. For Jesus is if a spouse cheats on a partner, on their husband or their wife, they're breaking the marriage relationship because it's assumed to be together. God expects the sexual relationship between a man and a woman in marriage to be a continuous, healthy thing in their life. And when the spouse is cheated on, that is breaking that. Now, does that mean that everyone who has a spouse that cheated should immediately automatically divorce their spouse? No, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Divorce is really the last option, is what this passage leads us to. But what it's telling us, the whole exception, Jesus says, is really, if you divorce your wife or your wife divorces a husband for any reason other than adultery, they're still glued together. And that's a breaking of that. 1 Corinthians talks about an abandonment. Then there's a whole question about abuse. Let me talk about that for a second. Well, what do you do? What does a spouse do? And it's usually the wife being abused by the husband, but sometimes the husband's being abused by the wife physically. We can't go into all the depths and details, and every situation is different and nuanced there. The knees knocking for me today is, wow, I'm talking about really personal, really deep, really hard things today. And I'm kind of shotgunning lots of stuff as Jesus did. And so, coming out of this, guys, if there's any misunderstanding, miscommunication, genuinely, let's sit down and talk, all right? And the abuse along the way is one thing, and I'd like, if Jesus were around today, I'd be like, Jesus, can you unpack that? Like, I wish that would have come up. Abuse is not new. It's been around since the beginning of time as well. And why doesn't the Bible deal with it? Let me make one observation. Jesus isn't trying to unpack for us in this passage all of the nuances of divorce. Can we agree to that? He's just answering one question, and he's dealing with the glueness factor. And he's like, you're so glued together that adultery is the only thing that really justifies it, because you already kind of undone it. Like you went and broke that sexual relational bond. Best that I know as a pastor, someone that's being abused in a marriage relationship needs to be safe. And I'm careful with that word abuse because it gets used a whole lot today. And a lot of times it's on target and on point. And sometimes, from what I can tell, it's really not. And I'm talking about, I even hesitate to put adjectives onto it. Abuse where there's physical harm, danger, and those kinds of things, the spouse needs to be safe. And my recommendation always has been as a pastor, and will be, is there needs to be a removal. There needs to be a separation. There needs to be safety in the middle of that. And there needs to be a clear separation. And then there's a process of what do you do after that? And that gets handled differently and uniquely in every situation. And that's going to be so situational that I'm not even going to go down that road. But it's not grounds for an immediate divorce. But ultimately, it may end up there. There needs to be separation in the process. So, if Jesus is saying this, I want us to recognize in churches, the culture around us doesn't care so much about divorce. It's no big deal. It's not a big thing. But I feel like in churches, we don't handle it that well today. And I don't know if we've stigmatized it over the years because of passages like this, or if it's true or real or not, I don't know. But I want to recognize that many of you who have been divorced or are divorced, whether you're remarried or not, you had biblical grounds to be divorced. Your spouse cheated on you. I have friends who are pastors whose wives just said they're done. And they found another person and they refused to end that relationship. And those men would have been glad to take their wives back, but their wives didn't want to hear anything of it. They wanted to forgive and work through the reconciliation, and their wives said nothing doing, and so they were divorced. With this passage, it's not on them. They've committed no sin. They've got nothing to confess to God and repent to God of related to that. They're sinners like all of us, and they got issues in other areas of life. And they're free. They shouldn't walk around with any kind of stigma, with any kind of sense of shame. Grief, sure, that just didn't work out. That's the challenge with marriage, is you're committing to one another and you don't have control over it. You know what the other person's going to do. But there should be no shame in that, no stigma, no nothing. And so Some of you have gone through a divorce where your spouse didn't cheat on you. And maybe you're asking yourself, well, maybe according to Jesus, my divorce wasn't appropriate. Maybe you initiated it. And each situation is different and unique in all of it. But let me just kind of go to the worst case scenario. If you were wrong and you did sin by divorcing your spouse, I want you to recognize, and let's say you went to the next step and remarried, which the Bible would say if it's not an appropriate divorce, you remarry, there's adultery in that because you broke this relationship that was permanent and now you're over here. Can I tell you, you're not living in a perpetual state of adultery. And the grace of Jesus, as we just sung about this morning, is that we have all messed up and done wrong things in our lives, folks. We have all messed up big time. We have all disobeyed the God of heaven and hurt other people. And that's what Jesus died for. When we are followers of His, we are surrendering our life, admitting our sin to Jesus. And what we give to Him is all of our sin, past, present, and even future. And we say, Jesus, would you take this away? Because I'm not good enough to overcome it. I can't be a good enough person. I can't earn your forgiveness, but I trust that you died on the cross to pay the penalty of death for all of my sin. And would you forgive me? And folks, regardless of what box you check on a marital status form and any kind of governmental document or whatever, you experience the grace of Jesus in your life, all shame and guilt is removed. You are forgiven. There's no reason to walk around with your head hung low. There's no reason, even if, hearing, as we're talking about this morning, to walk out there, it's like, maybe there's a sadness, maybe not, and every of those situations is different, but there's no reason to feel shame or guilt or, a guiltiness when you're forgiven by the Lord of heaven, and He looks at you and says, I don't see any sin. I just see that my Son is perfect over your life. And so the implications of this passage is guys, be careful who you marry. We'll talk about that in a minute. Singles, it's not as scary as you think, but be careful who you marry. And do everything that you can to stay married. Third thing I want you to recognize, we're kind of going to bleed into this next one. The definition of marriage, design of marriage is together, and God says, my plan wasn't divorce. My plan was to stay together. Don't change it. Divorce is the absolute last choice. Do everything, exhaust all possibilities before you get to that point. And then the obvious thing is, I'm so glad the disciples responded, I want you to notice is the difficulty of marriage. Look what the disciples said in verse 10. So He kind of was with them all together, lots of people. And as usual, the disciples said, hey, we got another question for you. This is the private tutoring session. Look what they said. They said to him in verse 10, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry. Can we not recognize, if you have no choice in divorcing, once you say I do in Jesus' mind, the difficulty of marriage is so bad that they said, whoa, it's just better if we don't ever do it. Well, you just shouldn't go down that road. They caught the significance and the seriousness of what Jesus was saying because they recognized that they are living, just as we are, in a broken world. Living in a completely broken world. I want you to look at the graphic on the screen. I want you to see this glass. This is some sort of, Japanese. It's not a vase, it's a cup or whatever. I think it's actually meant for alcohol, for sake or something. I don't know. Some of you are like, Sean, you're showing that in church. Everyone's like, I don't know, who cares? I don't know. It was a good picture and it was free. So this is a kind of a picture of our lives. Sin shattered, broke our relationship with God, and it damaged our body and soul. That's why we're born with diseases and all kinds of things. And when we get married, it's trying to glue two broken pieces back together again. And folks, it never works very well. So right off the bat, this is a picture of your marriage day one. Most couples that I've done, I don't marry a couple without doing a lot of counseling and work with them. So to be honest with you, at the end of the day, I'm not like keeping track, but it just kills me when people that I've married get divorced. I feel like, well, I failed that one. Well, Sean, it's not your fault. I get it. I know, but I want a decent batting average somehow in the middle of marriage. Kills me. And just about every one of those couples, when I'm talking with them, I inevitably along the way say, you need to fight more. And they just look at me and blink. And I'm like, yeah, you just think you're too good. You're just not being real yet with each other. You're in love. Oh, I know we should get married because we've never had a fight. We're soulmates. We're so wonderful together. And they just think the rest of their life's like it. I'm like, no, you need to have a good one before you get married. You need to have a real fight because I don't want you the day after you get married to get into a fight thinking that you married the wrong person or like what happened. Like, no, you're just finally getting to real life together. We are broken, messed up, sinful, selfish, prideful, confusing, and don't have all of our act together kind of people. And we're broken, and when you get married, you're a broken piece, gluing your life to the next broken piece, and it never holds water very well, does it? So the disciples knew that. And this was so serious that Jesus was like, yeah, you got no options in this. Once you are stuck in together, you got no way out, and you are stuck with whatever weirdness, craziness, badness, whatever, later on. And they just said, that is so painful. And this is so hard. Jesus, if what you're saying this is true, we're just better off staying single because it is impossible what you're telling us. Impossible. Some of you are probably thinking that as like, Sean, yeah, my divorce was, it was bad, but I don't have any options. It was so hard. The disciples are right there with you. I am as well because we are so broken in our sinfulness. That we don't live in the beginning, from the beginning part, the way God made us. We live in the after Genesis 3, where sin came in and we are all sinful, broken, messed up beings, and we're trying to glue together. That's why when Paul said in 1 Corinthians, hey, you get married, it's okay, but it's going to be really hard. Jesus said the same thing here. Look what his answer is. He said in verse 11, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it's given. I want you to subtly realize what Jesus just said. Jesus said, ding, 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 you're 100% correct. It's better if you don't get married. But he said, most of you can't handle it. You're not man enough for it. You're not woman enough for it. That's not really true. I want our singles to realize you've got some serious self-mastery. I'll get to that in a minute. And some serious self-discipline and some serious commitment to the God to live before God in that way, because God made you a man and woman with all the desires and all the things of who you are. And to live for God in your sexuality and your singleness is incredible. Absolutely incredible. So marriage is super duper difficult because we are so broken. People who commit day one to be together have to every day. I haven't done the math. How many is it? Thousands? I guess it is. I've been married over 30 years. So yeah, thousands of days I've had to make that choice every day to be married. Marriage isn't something you do once. It's something you do every day. It's something you do multiple times a day that you choose to relate to each other as you're supposed to, with all of the love and the commitment and care and respect and devotion that God tells you to, regardless of any craziness going on in life. Regardless of hangry days, bad days at the office. Just because things aren't going well for you doesn't give you the excuse to be mean or be short with your spouse. I had that problem just a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to go take a canoeing trip, and I had a hitch put on the car because I wanted to tow the trailer, and it was a brand new hitch. And yes, I should have checked it before the day before I was leaving, but when I hooked up the trailer, the lights didn't work. I'm like, and you know how it is. I'm juggling a million things. It was National Night Out. I got that. And I'm turning around. I'm trying to do a vacation. There was too much going on. And I'm trying to get all the inspection done. I had an appointment to get the trailer inspected, and the lights didn't work. Long story short, the mechanic didn't Never tested the lights when he put the harness in. He read in the instructions that there was some sort of fuse he was supposed to put in there. I'm like, that's why I paid you money, so I don't have to deal with a headache. And I got short with my wife in the process. Honey, I need you outside because we got to go. That was on me, not the mechanic's fault. Perfect world, we never do that. Marriage is difficult because we have all the emotions, all the shortness, all the stuff of life going on. And we got to deal with it. Let me give you 2 pieces of advice, men and women. Men, stop comparing your wife to other women. Your wife will become prettier, better, and more amazing to you if you quit looking at other women, whether print form, whether somebody you know at work, whether somebody you know at church. The woman you've married is absolutely amazing and is a good thing. And not one thing will change with her except your perspective, because you will stop comparing her. The most demeaning, derogatory thing you can ever do to your wife is compare her to anybody else. It's awful, and it undoes everything in your marriage. Ladies, quit disrespecting your husband and running him down in your mind and talking to other women about it, thinking that you just need support. And reality is you just need to stop disrespecting him and deal with him in your heart. I'm not saying you don't need to get help and talk to somebody, but so often you run men down right into their husbands down right to their face and around others. And there's nothing more demeaning, disrespectful to a man than that. Those 2 things, besides dealing with the anger and all the other stuff of life, will go miles down the road for your relationship. We could talk a whole lot more. This is not a sermon series on marriage, but this whole door is like, marriage is so hard. It's easier if you don't do it. And it really is. Except most of us can't handle it. I couldn't. And most of you can't either. Last thing, let's talk about singleness. So Jesus said, not everyone can receive this, but to those whom it is given. In verse 12, there are eunuchs, in other words, castrated men who are born that way. They're, because of the sinful world, some of our biology comes out messed up and wrong. And he says, Jesus knew that, and he said, some people are born that way. They are not sexual, and for them the whole marriage is different. They're not going to go down that road, but they're that way from birth. There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. It was common in courts of the day for the king to, if any man had regular contact with his wives, he would castrate them for obvious reasons. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to get cheated on. I'm not going to lose power and influence and all of that. And when you're king, you do that. And here's the singleness part for us. There are eunuchs. This is metaphor, we're not talking real castration here. There are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. Let me put it in today's terms. There are people who are choosing to be single for the sake of God's kingdom and to honor me. Most people who are single that I know don't want to be single. In fact, it pains me as a pastor. I hurt with that. I ache with it. I live in this world. I swim in this world of difficult relationships. It's why it's difficult for me to even talk and share about them. And most people who are single don't want to be single because it's generally not good for a man to be alone. And God knew that, and he made us male and female. I struggle with young adults trying to find somebody, because where should you go to find a good single person who loves Jesus that you might get to know and like enough? Church. And what do you do if the only people of the opposite sex of you, like, yeah, that's kind of not me or whatever, like, you're just going to go to church because, like, yeah, I'm here, not for God. I'm trying to get married. That doesn't feel right if you're genuine for God. And, where do you find them? I struggle with that, to be honest with you. It's really hard today in a digital world. Like, okay, you can go online, but that truly is okay. But that's hard. That's not an easy road to go down. But I want to make the observation for those of you that are single. Some of you should or ought to consider making the choice to be single to honor Jesus. And that choice is not necessarily a permanent choice, but it's a choice of where you are today. And maybe that changes down the road when there's someone in your life or your world and God says, now's the time. But the choice to be single should be a decision you make not a situation you're stuck in. Can I say that as clearly as I can be? It is you saying, to honor God, am not going the way the rest of the world is craziness. I'm going to honor him in my singleness. In other words, you shouldn't be making your top priority in life to find a spouse and make it all about that. It's okay to go fishing. You understand what I'm trying to say? My chances of catching fish go a whole lot higher when I get out of bed and get in the boat. So it's okay to do whatever you need to do to figure it out. It's for some of you who are young adults that, have friends that care about, it's okay to introduce them to people. It's okay to do the online thing. It's okay to do what you got to do to go fishing, but don't make that your idol and your world. Make your world, because you're single, serving Jesus. Don't do it as a situation that you're stuck in or a consolation prize. And recognize that you're doing something that is really, really hard. Those of us that are married need to have a whole lot of compassion and grace for single individuals than we do, because they are walking a difficult road, and it is not easy. And it's a road that you couldn't handle and that I couldn't handle. But it's a road that's something that God gives them. And so if you feel like, that might be me, embrace it and make your life dedicated your singleness dedicated to God. If you're married, your marriage and life ought to be dedicated to God too. But if you're single and you're like, I don't think I've got that gift of celibacy. I don't think that's just not me. Take it where you are. Serve God and honor him today in that. And it's okay to go fishing. Don't be afraid. Now, some people are single, I think, because they're afraid of their past experiences. Maybe they saw mom and dad's marriage blow up. Maybe the majority of the people in their relationships, and they're nervous and afraid. If I saw a huge, horrible car accident and, things blowing up, I'd be a little nervous getting in the car next time. On that fishing trip, I got a hook in my thumb, past the barb. Had to paddle across the lake with the lure flopping. I'm like, oh my goodness, we're like 9 miles to the road, and then however far to hospital. Think we got it out and trying to figure out how to do it. But I can tell you, the next 20 fish I caught, I was a little nervous, like I don't want to get hooked again. For some of you singles, you are so nervous that you're afraid to step into that world. And what actually needs to happen is not so much that you get comfortable with that as you need to make peace and deal with the other stuff that's making you there. Maybe it was horrible things you experienced in your family. Maybe it's past abuse. Maybe it's other stuff that's making you nervous. And you need to work through God's grace speaking you. That song we sang about fear, removing the fear because of God in you. Don't have a high standard for who you're looking to marry. But don't make it so high that the only guy you can marry is Jesus, ladies, because I'm sorry, you're not going to meet him. Every person you meet is going to be broken. You're not going to find it. Have a high standard, but not so high that no one could ever live to that, because that's more about you and not wanting to get hurt or your selfishness or your pride. And don't be afraid to take a step, and God will help you in the middle of that. And if there's personal healing you need, pursue that. But God blesses singleness and all of it. So guys, because of all of this, God made sexual relations only for marriage. And if you're having sex outside of marriage, at the beginning is like, that's not the way I made it. You're not to be glued to everybody else. You're to be glued to a spouse. Be serious about the relationship. Do whatever you got to take. Get help. Ladies, can I meddle just a little bit more? Men generally don't want to go to counseling when marriages aren't where they ought to be. I get it. I don't want to get a colonoscopy either. I'm with you. I don't want it. Ladies are usually 9 times out of 10, no, there's something wrong. And women tend to be a little more in tune when things are wrong than guys. They just are. Not always, but they are. But ladies, I'm just going to say it, and if you get upset or get mad, stop assuming the problem is your husband and the pastor or somebody else is going to fix them, and that's their job. This is not a mechanic where your muffler is falling off and you're like, can you just come in and take care of it? You got your own issues, lady. And you're not as good as you think you are, and your husband's not as bad as he thinks he is. Yeah, he's a sinner, and I know he's all messed up, but you are too. And it takes both. And men, you need to get over it. You need to listen to your wives. And she says things aren't good, they're not good. By definition, she thinks they're not good. They're not good. And you can walk in and wade into those kinds of things, and that's okay. But get the help you need. Because if you don't do that, you wake up one day where you're divorced. Nobody gets divorced overnight. You don't get a pothole overnight. I'm having to fix and seal my driveway, and I kind of like, where did that pothole come from? Well, I hadn't been taken care of like I should. Had I been looking at it, it's probably been coming over the last 5 or 6 years. And if you don't give time and attention to your marriage, you will end up in that divorce. There's a new phrase today. I'm going to end with this last comment. It's a new thing that I was just reading about. It's called menodivorce. It's kind of the idea of menopause divorce. I think it's usually women, but I think it applies to men whose kids are now grown up, and they kind of have, my interpretation, they have some time on their hands, and they're reevaluating life. And the divorce rate for them is going through the roof. You know why? Because their life has been all about the kids all along. The couple somewhere along the way made it about the kids, made it about getting the house and accomplishing all of this stuff, and they stopped making it about them. And they wake up one day, and the wife is like, I'm not having fun. I don't feel close to my husband. I don't have a purpose in my life with this family. My kids are gone. Why am I here? And if you don't keep sealing the driveway and keep investing in one another, you're going to end up apart. And so whatever junk and stuff you got to do in to-do list, make sure you are regularly doing regular investment in your life as a marriage. So we could unpack all of those topics separately, and I've probably confused some, hurt some, I don't know, but I'm just really trying to help you this morning with what Jesus told us about, is that he made us relationally. And in a broken world, it is really hard, guys. But thank the Lord for God's grace. And thank the Lord when two people know Jesus and they really serve him, there's nothing that you will face in your marriage that's insurmountable. Nothing. Because that brokenness, Jesus becomes the covering and the glue that fixes all of those cracks. And you can get married with tremendous confidence. And it's the best thing in the world that you will ever experience. And so don't be afraid.
Thank you for listening. Join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. at River of Life Church, or find us online on Facebook, YouTube, or at riveralbany.com.